The endless hallway. The smell of aged parchment was pungent in the air as Ezekiel Morgan unrolled the dry, yellowed scroll. The message, penned in fine hand, was an invitation that had found its way to him mysteriously, sealed with a wax emblem bearing a labyrinthine hallway. Below the emblem was the phrase, "To the seeker of knowledge, unravel the mysteries of eternity. Present yourself at the manor of St. Willow at dusk, on the eve of the winter solstice." Ezekiel's fingers hesitated over the emblem. Curiosity awakened in him. Many a tale passed in hushed tones was to be found regarding St. Willow Manor. It was where explorers disappeared, never to be seen again. Strange apparitions haunted long corridors of endless stretch. He carefully folded the scroll and looked up at them. Around the dimly lit study, the faces of his companions reflected both excitement and apprehension. Helena Drake held an ancient book close to her chest, her auburn hair catching the flickering lamplight. Michael Howard leaned against a dusty bookshelf, tapping a pencil rhythmically against his palm. Rachel Griffin fidgeted with her camera strap, glancing over at the scroll, as Sebastian Clark, the quietest of them all, sipped from a chipped mug and stared into the fire, lost in thought. "This is the real thing," Ezekiel said, breaking the silence. "The Manor of St. Willow. If the rumors are true, it's a labyrinth that defies time and space. This could be the discovery of a lifetime, or a trap." The group left the following morning, battling through the fierce December winds as they approached the manor. The landscape was growing desolate, with skeletal trees and snow-covered fields stretching out to infinity. When they finally reached the gates of St. Willow Manor, the sun had already set, and the sky was painted with hues of violet and crimson. Before them rose the manor, its twisted spires reaching towards heaven like broken stone monoliths, windows dark, and an unnatural glow seemed to be glowing from within. Ezekiel shoved open the wrought iron gate, hinges protesting. As they entered, the air cooled down. The grand entrance hall was a masterpiece of architecture, with vaulted ceilings and ornate chandeliers, but its decay was unmistakable. Tattered tapestries hung on the walls, telling scenes of a long-forgotten era. Battles fought, kings crowned, and a recurring motif of a hallway that stretched into infinity. "It's magnificent," Helena whispered, her voice tinged with awe. Michael frowned, his engineer's mind already dissecting the manor's peculiar geometry. "It's almost as if this place was built to confuse intruders. The corridors, they don't align properly." Rachel held up her camera and snapped a few pictures. Looking at the screen, her breath caught. "Something's wrong," she said, showing it to the others. In the photo, the hallway appeared to stretch out further than any human eyes could see, with moving shadows, though the air was still. Their exploration brought them to a set of double doors at the end of the entrance hall. Sebastian hesitated, his hand hovering over the brass handle. "There's something I should tell you," he began. But before he could continue, the doors creaked open on their own. Beyond the doors lay the hallway. It seemed ordinary at first glance: wooden floors, faded wallpaper, and dim sconces casting flickering light. But as they stepped inside, a strange sensation washed over them. Time felt slower, the air heavier. Ezekiel stopped abruptly. "Don't move," he warned. "Look behind you." The others turned, only to find the doorway they had entered through was gone. Instead, the hallway stretched endlessly in both directions. Helena gripped her book to her tightly. "This can't be possible. We just passed through that door." Michael knelt to study the floorboards. His hands shook. "This isn't some architectural oddity. This goes against the very laws of physics." The camera clicked again. In this picture, there were more than shadows. The figure at the end of the hall stood well away, shadowed by darkness across its face. "Who's there?" Ezekiel called out, but the figure did not move. As they stepped further into the hallway, they started finding weird artifacts. A pocket watch stuck at midnight, a portrait of a man whose eyes seemed to follow them, and bits of parchment covered in mysterious symbols. Helena deciphered some of the writings that spoke of a curse laid upon those who dared to uncover the secrets of the hallway. Each step brought new twists and turns. The walls appeared to move, trapping them into loops. Rachel swore she had heard whispers, voices whispering her name. Sebastian was getting more and more agitated, mumbling something about dreams he once had of this place when he had never even mentioned it. The hallway played tricks on their minds, revealing their deepest fears and regrets. For Ezekiel, it was the memory of a failed expedition that cost the lives of his team. For Helena, it was the guilt of a lost artifact she couldn't protect. Michael was afraid of losing control, Rachel of isolation, and Sebastian had a secret he refused to share. Eventually, they found a door bearing the same symbol of the labyrinth that had been impressed on the scroll. It led to a small room. On a pedestal, an hourglass lay old. As Ezekiel reached out to touch it, the sand inside started to move the other way. Helena gasped. "This hourglass, it's the key. It controls time here." As the two moved forward, the figure from the hallway filled the doorway. This time it was closer, its features sharper. Its hollow eyes pinned them in as it raised a bony hand and pointed back into the endless hallway. "Run!" Ezekiel shouted, grabbing the hourglass. The group ran, the hallway twisting and turning around them. The figure's footsteps pounded behind them, relentless and getting louder. They burst through a door and found themselves back in the grand entrance hall. The hallway was gone, replaced by an impenetrable wall of stone. The hourglass in Ezekiel's hands was now empty. Its sand vanished. "What does it mean?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. "It means," Ezekiel said, his eyes fixed on the labyrinth emblem above the fireplace, "that we've only just begun." An unknown burden sat suspended over the air as Ezekiel Morgan settled the empty hourglass atop a cracked mantelpiece. The group stood in collective shock, their breaths catching raggedly in their lungs. Not one of them could have summoned his voice to speak. An unyielding fog settled over the magnitude of their experience. Rachel Griffin shivered. What was that thing? She seemed to fight to speak with that one word. It was watching us. He turned over, wrung out his glasses with visibly quaking hands. It was never watching, he muttered. It was waiting for its moment. Helena shot Sebastian a sharp look. For us to make a mistake? It's not just the hallway, Ezekiel said, his voice low. This entire manor is alive. Every step we take, it's learning, adjusting, feeding on us. And whatever that figure is, it's a part of it. Michael Howard moved to the fireplace, studying the emblem etched above it. "This symbol," he began. "It's everywhere. The scroll, the hallway, and now here. It's like a map or a warning." She drew out an old book from her pocket and opened it up to flip through its brittle pages. She stopped at an illustration of a hall she was all too familiar with now. There were inscriptions written under the image in archaic script. "This book mentions something called the Labyrinth of Eternity," she said. "It is said to be a gateway between worlds, a place where time and space lose meaning. Few come out of it alive." Rachel's camera hung limply around her neck. Then why were we invited? Who sent the scroll? Ezekiel looked at her, his eyes grim. "I think we were chosen, not invited. The group decided to search the manor further, hoping to find answers, or at least a way out. As they wandered through the decaying halls, they noticed the strange geometry Michael had pointed out earlier. Walls seemed to shift when they weren't looking. Doorways appeared and disappeared, and the flickering sconces cast shadows that moved independently of the light. After what seemed like hours, they stumbled upon a room that was so different from the others. The door was dark mahogany, with carvings of celestial bodies, and even the labyrinth emblem. By pushing it open, The circular chamber revealed itself beneath a domed ceiling covered in paint, resembling the actual night sky. In its center stood a large table, its surface covered in an intricate map of the manor. "It's a map," Helena whispered, tracing her fingers over the carvings. "But look, it's constantly changing." The map pulsed faintly, the layout of the manor shifting before their eyes. Hallways extended, rooms vanished, and the labyrinthine corridor they had encountered earlier appeared and reappeared in different locations. "It's alive," Michael said, his voice barely a whisper. "The whole building is in flux." Rachel pointed her camera at the map, but by the time she snapped the photo, the room seemed to shudder in response. The sconces dimmed and the air grew icy. "Don't touch anything else," Ezekiel warned her. "This place doesn't like to be observed." Their search led them to a spiral staircase that went down into darkness. Against their better judgment, they followed it, the sound of their footsteps echoing ominously. At the bottom, they found a heavy iron door. Unlike the others, this door bore no emblem, only deep claw marks etched into the metal. Sebastian hesitated, his hand hovering over the handle. "We shouldn't open it," he said. Ezekiel ignored him, jerking the door open with a screech. Beyond was empty, a seemingly endless stretch of blackness that sucked all light from their lanterns. "Nothing," Michael said, stepping forward. "Just space." But then, as they watched, the emptiness moved. Shapes began to take shape, twisting, writhing figures that coalesced and disappeared in a flicker. Whispers filled the air, growing louder and louder until they became simply noise. "Close it!" Helena shouted, and Ezekiel slammed the door shut. The whispers ceased immediately, leaving only the sound of their ragged breathing. "That wasn't nothing," Rachel said, her face pale. "That was something looking back at us." As they retreated back up the staircase, they noticed the manor had changed again. The hallway they emerged into was unfamiliar, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected distorted versions of themselves. "This isn't where we came from," Michael said, panic creeping into his voice. "It doesn't matter," Ezekiel replied. "We keep moving." But the mirrors seemed to mock them. Each reflection moved a fraction of a second too late, their faces twisted in expressions of fear they hadn't yet felt. Sebastian stopped suddenly, staring at his reflection. "It's not me," he said. "What are you talking about?" Helena asked. But before he could even answer, his reflection leaped out of the mirror and grabbed him. Sebastian was dragged into the glass in a strangled cry. The others pushed forward to save him, but all that was left were sharp shards and a faintly echoing scream. "Sebastian!" Rachel shouted through the broken glass. "He's gone," Ezekiel said, his voice hollow. "We can't save him." Sebastian's death jolted the group, but there was no choice but to go on. They finally found themselves once again in the map room. In the table now lay this new inscription: 5 paths, 4 remain. Choose wisely, or none shall escape. Helena stared at the inscription, her hands trembling. "It's toying with us," she said. "This whole place is a game." "No," Ezekiel said, his eyes narrowing. "It's a test." Hours went by deciphering the map to find a path that would not lead them to death. Every route seemed to loop back to the hallway or the void. "We're running out of time," Michael said, glancing at the empty hourglass on the mantel. Rachel's camera clicked again, and this time, the photo revealed something chilling. A shadowy figure standing directly behind them. They turned as one, but the room was empty. "It's here," Ezekiel said, "and it's waiting for us to fail." The cold air seemed to press in closer, tighter around the group as they came out of the map room. Silence had become their best friend, except for the groans and creaks in the shifting walls. Sebastian's silence was a phantom, his last scream haunting every step of their way. Rachel walked through the middle of the group, clutching her camera tightly. How do we fight something we can't even see? She whispered. Ezekiel led the way, his lantern flickering with each hesitant step. We don't fight it, he said grimly. We outsmart it. Helena glanced over her shoulder, her voice tinged with frustration. And what if it's already outsmarted us? Ezekiel didn't answer. They stepped into a new hall, unlike anything they had experienced so far. The brass made the walls glow, and the floor seemed to be ticking in perfect rhythm, like walking over a large clock. Weird mechanical parts rotated quietly in the walls, shining with reflections from the light of lanterns. This feels different, Michael whispered, speaking softly above the rhythmic ticking. It's too clean, Helena replied, her eyes darting nervously. Like it's been waiting for us. Rachel stopped abruptly, aiming her camera down the corridor. Through the lens, she saw something that wasn't visible to the naked eye. Shadowy figures moving behind the gears, their shapes grotesque and distorted. Guys, she said, her voice trembling, we're not alone. Before anyone could react, the ticking began to grow louder, turning into cacophonous deafness. In the walls, the cogs started spinning wildly, as did the floor beneath their feet. Run! Ezekiel cried, grabbing Rachel's arm as they ran from the corridor closing behind them. They sped along the hall, the floor breaking apart beneath their feet into a churning whirl of gears and darkness. Just when they were sure the floor was gone for good, they burst through another door into a new room and threw the heavy door shut behind them. The room they stepped into was enormous, the walls lined with towering shelves of books that seemed impossible to reach. The air was full of dust, and decayed parchment had a faint perfume. Helena ran her fingers along the spines of the books, her expression wary. These titles, their names, hundreds of them. Rachel opened a book, only to drop it immediately, her face pale. It's about me, she whispered. It's my life, written out in detail. Michael picked up another book, his hands shaking. This one's about Sebastian. It ends with his death. Ezekiel scoured the shelves. His face is darkened. These aren't just books, they're records. This place is recording us. Deepening into the library, they saw strange symbols on the floor. Helena knelt and inspected them. This script, she whispered. It is the same script of the labyrinth emblem. These are spells, bindings. A sudden guttural laugh echoed through the library, sending chills down their spines. Who's there? Ezekiel demanded, holding up the lantern. The shadows at the far end of the room coalesced into a figure cloaked in darkness. Its voice was a low rasp, like the grinding of stone. You've come far, but the end is inevitable. The house takes all who enter. Rachel raised her camera, but the figure disappeared before she could snap a photo. Outside the library, they discovered another bizarre room. This one was round, with hundreds of identical doors along the walls. Each door had a different symbol on it, which they did not recognize. Helena sighed, frustrated. Another puzzle. Ezekiel studied the symbols carefully. These aren't random, he said. They're constellations. Look. He gestured to a door marked with the familiar emblem. The labyrinth. This one matches the map room, he said. Before anyone could stop him, Michael opened the door. Instead of a hallway, they saw a vast, star-filled expanse. It's beautiful, Rachel said, stepping closer. But the moment she reached out, the stars shifted, and a monstrous figure lunged toward her from the void. Ezekiel slammed the door shut just in time. Wrong door, he muttered. They tried one door after another, each leading to more and more strange and terrifying realms. One opened into a room filled with writhing, faceless figures. Another revealed a desolate wasteland under a blood-red sky. Finally, they found a door that led to a staircase spiraling upward. This has to be the way, Ezekiel said. A stair led from this place to a tower room where the windows let in an interminable storm. Lightning could now and then clear the black clouds to show a view of the manor exterior. It was a twisting, grotesque shape that made no sense at all. In the center of the room, on a pedestal, was an ancient hourglass. This hourglass was full of black sand that flowed up instead of down. Helena approached it warily. "This is the key," she said. "If we can find a way to use it, maybe we can stop this." She reached out for the hourglass and the storm outside raged up. The windows broke and a howling wind filled the room. A massive figure stepped out from the shadows, humanoid but impossibly tall with eyes that glowed like molten gold. Its voice reverberated through the room as it spoke. "You cannot escape. You are part of the labyrinth now." Ezekiel took one step forward, holding high his lantern. "We won't let this place take us," he said in defiance. The figure laughed, a sound which seemed to shake the very foundations of the manor. "You think you have a choice?" it said. "The labyrinth feeds on your fear, your despair. The more you fight, the stronger it becomes." With nothing else to do, the group collaborated on deciphering the inscriptions on the pedestal. Helena's knowledge of ancient languages proved invaluable, but the task was slow and grueling. All the while, the figure watched, its presence oppressive. Finally, they uncovered a clue. The hourglass could reset the labyrinth, but only at a cost. "One of us has to stay behind," Ezekiel said, his voice heavy. The group was silent, crushed by the decision that lay ahead. "I will do it," Rachel said softly. "No," Helena said. "We will find another way." "There is no other way," Ezekiel said. "This place doesn't give second chances." As the group argued, the black sand in the hourglass started flowing faster, showing them time was running out. The room fell silent after Rachel's declaration. The black sand in the hourglass surged upward, marking the passage of their dwindling time. The oppressive presence of the towering watcher loomed over them like a weight they could not escape. "This can't be the only way," Helena said, her voice shaking as she glanced from Rachel to the glowing hourglass. Ezekiel stepped forward, his jaw tight. "We can't keep delaying. If we don't make a decision, the labyrinth will make it for us." The watcher's molten eyes flickered with amusement. "Do you truly believe you have a choice? The labyrinth chooses its sacrifices." Its words hung heavy in the air, and the group's unity began to fracture under the strain. The watcher stepped closer to the hourglass, its towering form casting long shadows that seemed to twist and writhe. "The labyrinth has existed for centuries," it said. "It is older than the oldest of your civilizations, built on the sacrifices of those who entered seeking answers and escape." Helena, her curiosity outweighing her fear, stepped forward. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why does it need sacrifices?" The watcher tilted its head, a smooth motion that seemed almost unnatural. "The labyrinth is alive," it said. "It hungers for fear, despair, and the resolve of those who dare challenge it. Your presence sustains it, but only a true act of surrender can feed its core." They all looked at one another uncertainly as options dwindle with each passing second. Helena's frustration boiled over. "We're not staying here to feed this thing," she said, grabbing the hourglass. As her fingers touched its cool surface, the room around them dissolved into a swirling vortex of darkness. The pedestal, the windows, and even the watcher disappeared, replaced by an endless, shifting corridor. "Helena!" Ezekiel shouted, reaching for her. But she was gone, swallowed by the shifting walls. And of the three who remained, Ezekiel, Rachel, and Michael, the world into which they fell was a vast hall. In its center, otherworldly light flickered dim. Shadows danced on the walls. They seemed to take forms half-human. "We have to find her," Rachel whispered. Ezekiel nodded. "And we must discover how to work the hourglass." Michael nodded toward an archway at the far end of the hall. That might lead us to her, or to whatever this labyrinth wants us to see. Helena stumbled through the shifting corridor, her surroundings disorienting and ever-changing. The walls pulsed, alive with a dark, veined energy that seemed to mock her. "Where are you taking me?" she shouted, her voice echoing endlessly. She had a doorway in front of her. It pushed her through. She was thrust into a small, dimly lit room with one mirror. The mirror's surface wobbled like water. As she came closer, an image resolved. It was herself, but not as she knew herself. This Helena was cold, cruel, and coated in blood. "Who are you?" Helena breathed. The reflection smiled, a sinister twist of her lips. "I'm you," it said. "The real you. The one who's willing to do whatever it takes to survive." Meanwhile, Ezekiel, Rachel, and Michael stepped into a vast chamber filled with statues. Each statue was lifelike, its face frozen in expressions of terror, anger, or sorrow. "These aren't statues," Rachel realized, her voice breaking. "These are people, trapped." Michael shuddered. "Then we need to keep moving, before we join them." In the center of the room was a pedestal that looked like the one they had seen before. On it rested another hourglass, this one filled with crimson sand. "Do we take it?" Ezekiel asked, his hand hovering over the hourglass. Rachel shook her head. "We don't know what it does. It could be a trap." Before they could decide, the statues began to move, their stone limbs creaking as they turned to face the group. "Run!" Michael shouted, and they bolted for the nearest exit, the statues lurching after them with unnatural speed. Helena's trial continued as the mirror showed her fragments of her past, moments she had tried to forget, mistakes she had buried. "You've always been selfish," the reflection taunted. "You've always put yourself first, no matter the cost." "That's not true," Helena said, tears streaming down her face. The reflection sneered. "Prove it. Sacrifice yourself for them. Stay here and let them go free." Helena's resolve wavered. Could she truly make that choice? The group reconvened in the center of the maze, a great room with walls of throbbing black stone and a swirling vortex at its core. Helena was already there, standing beside the hourglass. "I know what we have to do," she said, her voice steady. Rachel shook her head. There has to be another way." "There isn't," Helena replied. "The labyrinth feeds on sacrifice. If one of us stays, the others can escape." The Watcher appeared, its eyes glowing brighter than ever. "The choice has been made," it said, its voice echoing through the chamber. Helena turned to the group, tears in her eyes. "Promise me you'll get out of here. Promise me you'll live." She set her hands on the hourglass. Black sand trickled into the lower bulb faster, accelerating to a roar. The labyrinth shuddered. Its walls groaned, folded inward, and crashed to dust. "Go!" she yelled. Ezekiel, Rachel, and Michael stopped for a heartbeat and ran toward the vortex. When they stepped through, Helena screamed a cry of pain and triumph. The air was heavy with silence, vibrating with anticipation. Ezekiel, Rachel, and Michael stumbled through the vortex and collapsed into a clearing both eerily serene and profoundly oppressive. The labyrinth had carried them again, but this was different from the shifting corridors and rooms they had crossed before. They stood at the edge of a vast, dark chasm, swirling with an evil, greenish mist. Central to the chasm drifted a colossal, pulsating black stone mass, the core of the labyrinth. It was pulsating with the pulsing of some living heartbeat, each beating sending shockwaves through the swirling mist. Ezekiel turned back to the vortex, which now shimmered faintly behind them, a doorway that seemed to taunt them with its fragility. "We have to go back for Helena," he said firmly. Rachel, her voice tight with grief, placed a hand on his shoulder. "She made her choice. We can't let her sacrifice be in vain." Michael pointed toward the core. "If that's the source of all this, then maybe destroying it is the only way to end this nightmare for her and for us. As they debated their next move, a voice echoed out of the mist. Soft, almost melodic, yet it carried an undercurrent of menace. "You have come so far," the voice said. "Few have reached the heart of the labyrinth, but you misunderstand its purpose." A tall man emerged from the mist, clad in tattered robes and hooded, his face indistinguishable, at once commanding and unsettling. "I am the keeper of the core," he said, his voice vibrating with unnatural power. "And I have been waiting for you." Ezekiel advances. "What exactly?" Keeper tilts hood, his head seemingly tilting him into a subtle smile. "The labyrinth doesn't exist for destruction. The labyrinth will always be open to its inhabitants. Their destiny awaits on the way, a connection between two worlds. From now on, between your world and infinity." Rachel frowns over her brow. "For what?" "To knowledge," the keeper replied, his voice full of reverence. "To power, to the truth that your world was not the first, nor will it be the last. The labyrinth exists to test those who seek to understand this truth." Michael's fists clenched. "And what about the sacrifices? The people trapped in stone, Helena?" The keeper's face clouded. "Every truth requires a price. The labyrinth rewards those who are willing to pay it." Ezekiel's gaze shifted to the core, its pulsing rhythm accelerating as if it sensed their presence. "And if we refuse?" The keeper's voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "Then you will become part of the labyrinth, like all those before you." The keeper raised a hand, and the mist surged forward, engulfing the trio. They found themselves separated, each facing a trial designed to test their deepest fears and desires. Ezekiel's trial. He stood in a field of ash, surrounded by the faces of those he had failed to protect in his past. Their accusing eyes burned into him as a voice whispered, "You cannot save them. You never could." Rachel's trial. She was in a decaying cathedral, its stained glass windows revealing scenes of her life's regrets. The images changed, and she saw Helena's sacrifice and her decision to leave Helena behind. A figure stepped forward, a reflection of herself, cold and unyielding. "You let her die," it said. Michael's trial. He was in a narrow corridor lined with mirrors, each one showing a distorted version of himself. And as he moved, the reflections reached out, their voices a cacophony of doubt and self-loathing. Each somehow overcame their trials, emerging at the edge of the chasm once more. The keeper awaited them, his demeanor unreadable. "You have seen your truths," he said. "Now you decide. Will you take Helena's position, feeding the labyrinth, or will you destroy the core and end its existence?" The core pulsed erratically, its light waning and waxing back again in rapid succession. Rachel's voice was even as she spoke. "If we destroy it, what happens to the labyrinth?" The keeper smiled grimly. "It will collapse. Its knowledge, its power, all of it will be lost." Ezekiel looked at Rachel and Michael. "We can't let it continue. Too many lives have been lost already." Michael nodded. Helena wouldn't want this thing to exist any longer. The three came to the core, their determination set. When they touched it, a wave of energy shot through them. The labyrinth howled in protest, walls shaking and crumbling. The keeper's voice rose above the turmoil. "You fools! You don't know what you are destroying!" Too late, though. The core shattered, releasing a blinding light that consumed everything. Ezekiel, Rachel, and Michael found themselves outside the maze. The entrance of the labyrinth now had turned into nothing but dust. The air was heavy with a depressing atmosphere. However, the calm, eerie silence now filled the air. They looked at each other with the weight of their journey pressing heavily on them. "She's gone," Rachel whispered softly as tears ran down her face. Ezekiel put a hand on her shoulder. She saved us, and she ended the labyrinth's reign. As they walked away, the faint sound of Helena's voice echoed in the wind. A final goodbye.